Welcome, everyone, to the Brand Fortress HQ podcast. I'm your host, John Stojan, and we also have our co-founders for Brand Fortress HQ here, Mike Kaufman and Matt Atkins, joining us for this episode. Our guest today is Brian R. Johnson, who is the co-founder of DeepMAI Technologies, who also has been involved in the Amazon space for a long time and been one of the big experts in the space. In fact, one of the things I know Brian most for is I actually started out in one of his courses learning PPC myself, kind of back in the day. So, Brian, I know you've been really involved in the Amazon space and been a thought leader for a long time. But for people that maybe aren't familiar with you, can you share a little bit of your background and kind of how you got involved in Amazon and where you're at today and kind of everything that you're involved in?
Yeah, of course. No, that is something that's actually pretty fun is when people have never heard of me. I love that more than anything, to be honest. Within the space, obviously, outside of Amazon, nobody could care. So I've been in e-commerce for 17 years now. And there's a little bit of pain that I feel in that because that's a long time.
I got you, man. I've been in e-commerce for 30 years.
There you go. I was a late bloomer. I've been in the Amazon space for the last 10 years. And primarily the way that I started out was I had a buddy of mine that pulled me in who was selling like cell phone cases, and he was doing crazy numbers for back then. And he pulled me in, and I went to I had launched my first product, went through the whole sourcing thing, had like a kitchen tool. It wasn't a garlic peeler, but I had a kitchen tool, and I was selling it, and it was selling pretty good. I'm like, oh man, I'm gonna have to reorder it because it's selling through. And I went to my first amazing conference in Austin, Texas, and there was like, I don't know, 600, 1,000, maybe 1,000 people in the room. And I remember I was sitting in the audience, and one of the guys up on stage, it was Jason Flaley, and for those of you who know him, he goes, Amazon is so easy. He's like, it's like nobody's got their listings correct. This is back in the day when you could pretty much do anything and do better. And he goes, look at all these examples. And he starts bringing up examples of different products in different categories. And sure enough, he brings up my number one direct competitor. He goes, this niche is just wide open.
Oh, I thought he was going to pull up your listing.
It was just as bad because here's what happened. So in a room of 1,000 people, apparently 40 people were not that creative. And within 2 months, I had 40 new competiters.
Just like that. Gotcha.
And so I was in my early years of trying to figure out that it's like, okay, I actually can innovate. I can, develop something, bring something new to market. And so I said, oh, let me figure this out. Let me, what's missing here is this cleaning brush. 6 months later, everybody had that same cleaning brush. So I started seeing the pattern. Like, okay, you get caught in 6 months, no problem. You're done if you haven't moved forward in the last few months. And so one of the things that while I was doing that, one of the my first product, and I've had a number of other product partnerships and brands and products that I've built myself. Some are hit and miss. Like if I were to start today, yeah, I would kill it. And I do that with some of my partnered brands that I work with. Obviously the knowledge has come so far in the day. In part, frankly, I have to admit is that one of the things that I did was that because I had an early opportunity of figuring out that the big weak spot, the big blue ocean, was Amazon advertising, and that there wasn't any software, there was no training available from Amazon or anybody else. Nobody was really speaking about it. Nobody was really troubleshooting, collaborating on it. There wasn't any good advice out there. But I needed that not only to grow my own products, but also I had a friend of mine who actually had an 800 SKU beauty brand on Amazon. Way too many SKUs. Trying to help them, build that. And so I had to wrap my head around this Amazon advertising thing back in its infancy. When I figured out, it's like, okay, there's nothing out there. no training, no software, and nothing. Let me go ahead and start a community. Let me start a Facebook group, and we'll talk with 20 people. That group has 22,000 people in it now. But what that did was it actually became, I didn't know it at the time, but it actually became the catalyst for me being forced to master the Amazon advertising material. Because what would happen is that people would come in and they would start joining in. Of course, they had a question like, "Hey, I'm trying to troubleshoot this with this. How do I answer this?" It'd be crickets, right? So I'd have to go out, I'd figure out what the answer is, and I'd reply. Well, I kept on doing that, and after a while, if you always have the answer for everybody who asks, at some point you can no longer step away from that. You're forced to always have the answer, which is a good thing from hey, I'm at top of my game as far as understanding what's going on. But I also like to experiment, and so I could reach out. But at the same time, you could never not have the answer. I've never had a problem with saying like, you know what, I don't know. I'm not going to just make up an answer because somebody asked a question that I don't know. Like if I don't know, it's like, I don't know, but I'm curious to find out, and so I'll research it. What that did is it kind of built almost like my Amazon community character, in that I realized, okay, what's missing? People are saying it's like, man, I wish I could, I'm spending 8 hours, a week, doing this, doing my campaigns, manually editing everything. I'm like, screw that. I'm like, I can't do that with my own. So, came out with the first software. It was horrific, which I think is kind of a general rule, is that if you're not embarrassed by the first product that you come out with, you're too late. And I was embarrassed. It was ugly, but I had, within a year, I had 4,000 sellers who were using it. And it was a train wreck, but we improved it greatly. That was PPC Scope back in the day. 2015, maybe 14, 15, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
Next opportunity came up when it came to training. I didn't know at the time, but I had met one of my previous business partners. We had started Sponsor Products Academy to do training, and then later on Canopy Management, which was the agency. Both of those have had a lot of success. Both PPC Scope and Sponsor Products Academy have been gobbled up by competition and other offerings out there and not updated, and therefore it was shuttered. Both of those were acquired and shuttered. And so Canopy Management still is rolling strong, growing like crazy. But I recognize certainly is that, okay, we're back in this space where something's missing. Something has to change. Something's got to give, because the ad costs are only going to continue to go up. And the biggest challenge that people are saying is like, well, advertising is just a cost of doing business. I'm like, I've got to reject that. Even though I'm a big proponent of advertising, I had to reject those kind of statements, because I'm like, no, that just screams a lack of innovation. So I partnered up with my current partner for DeepMAI, and he had already started developing the technology. I helped to advance it, and we've advanced a lot in the last year and a half, to the point where we now have this system that essentially is a big data approach. So it goes out and it will crawl an entire product niche and look at hundreds of different data points, the combinations of that, along with third-party API data and additional analysis. We get some of these reports. It's analyzing. We had one. Our biggest one so far is 28 million data points that we're analyzing for one product niche. So it is a lot. To put that in perspective, I actually figured this out, and that is it would take. It said that 1 million data points analyzed correctly would take 1,000 man hours to do per million data points to do it manually. So 28,000 man hours, which I'm never going to spend that in any one niche. I'm not going to spend that. I've already spent 10,000 hours on Amazon as a whole. I'm not going to do that on a specific product niche. But we found out some really interesting insights, because not only were we able to reverse engineer, because we had so much data to tell us what the patterns were, we were able to reverse engineer how A9 behaves differently for organic ranking of products for each product niche, which I didn't realize that it handled it differently. So we were able to break that down, and there's a lot of other things that we continue to find as we do more and more research. But ultimately, where we're at today is we've got a select group of beta testers, and we're pointing them in the right direction as far as like, here are the search terms that you can rank your products for. Here's what it's going to take in order to get there. And it's not simply just advertising. It's knowing exactly like, okay, 40% of your effort needs to be put on the title. 22% of your effort needs to be put on the bullets. 18% needs to be put into PPC. Here's the PPC that's actually going to work in this case. It's that specific. And so what that gives them the ability to do, not only the initial pass, I guess, but to say, okay, here's the direction it points. But every single week and every single month, we're going back and say, okay, here's what's changed in the competitive space. You've got 3 other direct competitors that changed their title slightly, and that created a little more resistance, and so you're not as strong as you were a week ago. Here's how you adjust. So it's this fine-tuning based off of this big data analysis that gives us a hyper-detailed situational awareness of a product niche, unlike anything that's on the market today. And I will absolutely geek on this I could be on here for 3 hours talking about it, frankly. So
let's
cut it off there.
Yeah. Well, let's double click on a couple of things there. I think the first one, for people that may not, eat, sleep, and breathe Amazon, especially Amazon algorithms. When you talk about A9, you're talking about the algorithm that Amazon actually uses to determine how to rank products. Is that
correct? Yes.
Okay.
And no, there's no A10.
Which is a whole nother discussion.
There is an A8 though.
Okay. Which is a whole nother, probably a discussion for another time. But yeah, I think that's important to point out as well. So I think there's a couple of things there. First of all, and you kind of alluded to it, and I just want to maybe dig a little bit deeper on it, is this idea of, because I see some of the same things where, of course, ad costs are going up. If we look at how much brands are spending on ads, things have gotten a lot more competitive over the last couple of years. And the trend is, that it's going to get more competitive. And quite frankly, those costs are going to continue to rise. And you do have to have some amount of advertising on Amazon. So when you say, hey, I don't need to continue to go along, or a brand doesn't need to continue to go along with that trend, what does that alternative look like based on what you're seeing from the data sets?
Right. Yeah, it's that is absolutely true. That's kind of where my I want to be part of that, that resistance movement, saying like, no, we're going to do something different. I'm not really that rebel. I'm just that much of a geek that's willing to research and say like, I think I can do that better. But ultimately, you're absolutely correct. Is that there's a point of reason where when brands will regularly say, it's like, well, advertising is just a cost of doing business now. It's like, okay, yeah, but how are you using it? It's like, well, to grow ad sales. It's like, no, no. Because if it's just to grow ad sales, then your only focus is on dialing in ACoS, return on ad spend. You're tweaking things, which is fine if you're a quartile or something like that and want to adjust like little bids and that kind of stuff. Cool, go for it. But in order to get what you're actually going for, which is, I want to increase sales for my brand. I want to, in order to do that, I need to get higher visibility of my product, and while I'm also working on increasing conversion rate of my product. And so the visibility is, yes, you can spend money on advertising. It's very common for brands to spend 30, 40% of 30%, 40% of their total sales come from ads, and it's way too high. It should be less than that, because it definitely needs to be more focused on what is this producing for you? What's the end result here? What's your goal here? Is it just to continue to run a break-even campaign or a slightly profitable campaign in order to get those sales, or is it to actually position yourself? And the idea had always been is that, well, if you run advertising, and I've said, I've spoken this myself, is you can run very specific targeted advertising on individual keywords, and that can improve your organic ranking. True. But the problem with that is it actually going to do that? Do you know before you spend a bunch of money? And in most cases, no. In most cases, it's an experiment of like, oh, let me spend a bunch of money and I'm going to optimize it along the way. And I'm hoping that it's going to increase my organic ranking, but I don't know for sure, because I don't know everything that goes into what it takes for A9 to determine did it increase my sales velocity enough in order to lift up my organic ranking. And it's a contributing factor, but by no means is it the full story. And so just increasing unit sales velocity and participating in Amazon's ad platform is not enough by itself. So then it begs, go ahead.
Can I ask a couple of questions then? So let's say, along those lines, so would you say at this point, because of the way the Amazon game has changed, and it's possible that the answer could be obviously a little self-serving because obviously you have DeepM, but I'm still curious what your thoughts are on it. Are we entering into territory where if you want to effectively compete on Amazon and you want to say minimize the ad expense, like you only want to be utilizing the ad expense that's necessary, are we in a space where that this high level big data type situation is really the only next logical step in that progression in order for us to separate ourselves from competitors and be able to actually do that? Or are there other ways that we can accomplish that same thing? Do we need it?
Yes, yes. And Michael, having watched your other shows, I mean, I knew that I was hoping that you'd come through with some of the hard questions here on this to challenge me. So I appreciate that. Thank you. There are multiple ways in order to accomplish the goal, but really it's figuring out what the exact sequence and combination is that is correct for your product, for within your competitive set, within your subcategory, within your product niche. That's the level of detail that you need to know. That's the information you need to have. There are things that we see. It's like, well, this is what's working now. Well, what's working now is usually what is actually changing organic rank or increasing sales or visibility. If you recall, back in the days that, like the rebate giveaway was very popular. It still happens today. It's just not as public. But that is a version of gaming the system because you are essentially you're artificially increasing the sales velocity for a product. And yes, that does have an impact. But I can tell you based on the stats, you're talking maybe 20-25% impact on the algorithm with that sales velocity, which is a lot less than we had always thought it was. We always thought that sales velocity was the number one factor when it came to Amazon ranking products in organic search for different search terms. It's not. However, everything feeds off of each other. In other words, there's no one magic bullet, but you can have one thing that compensates for something else. One thing that's strong that compensates for something else that's weak. As an example of that, let's say your product listing doesn't have a specific phrase, a search phrase in the content at all. It's not in the title. It's not in the bullets. It's not anywhere. And so you're weak on relevance, on content relevance. You're in the category where that search term is relevant, and so you will have that pairing. But your listing itself may not have that exact search term that you want to rank for. But then you go out and use something like TikTok ads or, shop or a rebate giveaway or something in order to drive through sales on a product that is specifically using some kind of a URL that has an embedded search term, let's say, right? Right or wrong as far as whether or not you'll get caught using that, that's a different argument. But if you drive enough sales either through PPC advertising or through off Amazon sales to a specific search term, you can essentially offset the weaknesses you have everywhere else. But what that requires you to do is you're constantly now investing either in PPC or off Amazon sales or a combination of both, giveaways and that type of thing. That's also one of the reasons why historically most of the rebate giveaway promotions that you would do, yes, you would get up to page 1, but what happens a month later?
Almost every time you see it drop off. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
So then I would say that it sounds to me like one significant benefit of a big data set, analyzed system like what you have is that it potentially allows you to find those weak points that are essentially free to change versus using the tools that we often end up using as a crutch to address those, which cost money. So we get to find those free options that we can improve and lessen the expense on the other side of the crutch.
Exactly. Now, there's a challenge here because there's only so much space in content. Let's say, for instance, like one of the things that we definitely see, and it's not going to be any surprise, is that having the exact search phrase you're going after in your title, which is part of this, has a large contribution on organic ranking on Amazon. But there's a couple problems with that. One is you can only fit so much content into the title, right? So there's only so many terms that you can go after. You can do different word combinations to try to get Amazon to see relevance with, 5 to 10 different search terms, using, a combination of word stuff, keyword stuff, title. But then, ultimately you probably have to make up for that with, you'd want to drive additional unit sales velocity through PPC or off Amazon sales. If you, that's the point I'm trying to get to on this, is that if you build up enough of the combination, it may be easier for you. In other words, if you focus in on, like, say, 4 or 5 terms that you can put into your primary content fields of a product listing, then that's probably enough. If you're trying to go after 100 different search terms, that becomes a bigger challenge. In other words, you're going to have to pick your battles. Now, where this helps is also knowing what are the strengths and weaknesses of every single product in my competitive set or within my product niche entirely that are going to give me an advantage. If I've got 50 competitors who are super strong in all these factors and they've optimized for this specific search term, you're going to have a difficult time taking over page 1, top 10, top 5 organic position, because everybody else is already optimized for that search phrase. Now, that may be a very lucrative search phrase. And so ultimately, long term, it may be worth to invest into taking that over and holding it. But Amazon is going to build trust and put you there from an organic ranking standpoint based off consistency of you having your listing optimized for those target search terms and driving unit sales velocity to those specific search terms. And if you start and stop, or if you're constantly changing, you constantly break that trust, and you'll never increase your organic ranking because you're moving too much. You're moving the targets too much. You've got to have a certain amount of consistency over an extended period of time.
So that brings up a question for me, and maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying. So you were mentioning the consistency. Are you referring to an overall consistency of your listing in terms of a generalized relevancy, or are you talking about consistency of a listing like in its entirety? Like we shouldn't really be changing the listing regularly, like running, split testing and things like what do you mean when you say consistency?
No, so with split testing, I do actually recommend you do. if you're using Amazon experiments to do the round robin split testing. That's the only thing that's valid on Amazon when it comes to split testing anyway. And that's oftentimes the approach that you would do in order to mitigate risk of changing the title is to use the A/B split testing through Amazon experiments.
Right.
It moves a little slower. It takes longer in order to get trusted by Amazon and to get that, to build up that organic rank versus if you just committed full time, committed 100% to the new title. If you're doing split testing, then 50% of the time you're focused, So in other words, you dilute it by half. But yes, it's a combination of what you're doing as far as to promote it, where you're spending your ad dollars when it comes to things like advertising off Amazon promotion, as well as your on-page SEO. There's going to be a sequence or a priority of the different fields, right? Title and bullets will certainly be in the top 5 as far as things that you should stay focused on. When it comes to things like A+ content, A+ hidden content, classic description field, spec, the specs content, back-end search term fields. These all have a contribution, but they may have a minor contribution compared to whatever Amazon is clearly favoring in that specific subcategory. So each subcategory has its own pattern as far as where A9 emphasizes or has a much higher respect for certain features or data fields that is using, whether that's content relevance or performance metrics for the products relative to your competition. And that could be things like sales velocity, price, ratings, that kind of stuff.
So for brands that maybe don't have access to 25 million different data points, for each category, what advice would you give them to at least start, testing, to take advantage of some of these different things that you're talking about as far as, what keywords that they might be able to get more juice out of, and how to, optimize their system and essentially play nicer with the A9 algorithm?
Yeah, I mean, you may not have all the visibility to know that, well, in my category, price is weighted, 11%, and bullet points are weighted, 23%, that kind of stuff. That gives you more specific. You may not also have the visibility of what are the weak holes in my competition that I can exploit, right? Which is what big data gives you. But there are some tried and true best practices in that. Don't rely on advertising as a whole to essentially make or break your product. Most brands focus in on their hero product and their sidekick product, so their number 1 and number 2 seller, and oftentimes they neglect the other children. They neglect their other products, and they forget to try to optimize them. And what I would recommend doing is optimize each of your products for a different set of search terms so that you can get your product into a different. Now you can have overlapping search terms, of course, but try to don't just have your entire catalog focused in on the same set of keywords. Focusing the product listing optimization so that there's more intention that this product is designed to get in front of this specific audience using this kind of search terminology and talk to that audience accordingly. Certainly things like ChatGPT and Claude certainly help you do that a lot easier as far as coming up with a wording that is attractive and compelling. I am a huge proponent of differentiating from your competition, stating right up front in your title, your main image, and your bullet points what it is that's different about your product that people should know so that they could care. Like, I'm going to click through onto this product listing because they're doing something slightly different, slightly better.
And just to interrupt there, because I think that's an important point to double click on as far as, the conversation that we're having is, so there's 2 different things, because what you just mentioned is really about speaking to the audience in the sense of, saying how your product is, or the benefit of your product is significantly better than your competition may not be a keyword, but it's incredibly important for your click-through rate and your conversion rate.
Yeah.
Well, at the same time, you have to balance that with, what keywords are really going to drive sales to make sure that you get the visibility that you need. So how do you think about that as far as, prioritizing when you only have, let's just take the title, on mobile, you've got about, somewhere between 85 and 90 characters to kind of catch their attention. And from a search perspective, depending on your category, 150 to 200 characters. How do you think about prioritizing both catching attention versus keywords, and also even within keywords, I guess the second one there of
It kind of depends on how. So we are certainly learning more the more that we implement what we learn from each subcategory and how it behaves differently. It is interesting. I would not have previously thought, but it kind of goes back to an old school thought of let's say I've got 250 characters in my title. I should fill up all 250 characters, right? There's that school of thought. There's the opposite school of thought of have it very short. And I used to always push back on like, no, don't have a short title because it's too specific, it's too narrow, and it doesn't give you a chance to really state the benefits to the shopper. Ultimately, there is organic ranking that's going to occur as a result of appeasing the algorithm. But ultimately, your conversion rate and your profitability and the profitability of your ads and your product is ultimately going to come down to how well are you connecting with the shopper and what their needs are. Answering the question, what's in it for me, to the shopper. And so differentiation from a title standpoint, focusing in on the first 75 to 80 characters that are visible on mobile, how are you going to hook the shopper when they're on their mobile phone, which more than half of them are, certainly it used to be, like they'd search on the mobile and then they'd buy on the desktop. Now it's all, you've got, probably 50, 60% of your search and purchase. It's going to go through a mobile device now anyway, maybe higher than that. I'm not sure. But you only have a limited space that's showing of the title. So yes, you could have a full 250 character, title, and then making sure that your first 75, 80 characters has not just maybe a relevant search term, but also what is your differentiator? What's a compelling benefit or feature that is going to set your product apart from most of your competition that's visible in order to get them either curious enough or like they see something that attracts them. It's like, oh, that's actually kind of what I want that benefit, or that actually is something I'm looking for to click through to your product listing. And then optimizing your product listing to tell the story and to focus again on feature, or on benefit, supported by feature, right? And so throughout your secondary images and your bullet points and your A+ and everything, it's always like, you're reinforcing differentiation. You're reinforcing the benefits of the product to that consumer, and you're highlighting the features that make all that happen.
So, Brian, I have a question for you. So, I assume that DeepM has been in the process of development for a while now. I expect.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly how much testing and case study work that's been done and how many beta testers you've got, but of what you have done, for listeners who may not necessarily be in a position to pay for big data, which is expensive. It's not inexpensive, we'll say.
No.
But it may be worth the price. Let's be clear. At the end of the day, it may be well worth the price. But for somebody who's like, I don't know, have you seen? We know from one niche to another. Obviously, what your tool is going to tell a particular brand these are the areas you should highlight because you got the best chance of making a significant impact with these 3 or 4 things, whatever. Yeah. But are you seeing any patterns in terms of what things they want to focus on the most, brand to brand, niche to niche, that tend to ride high on that list. Because for instance, we've been mentioning here, we know, at least we believe, let's say, we believe, and there are certain things that the Amazon community assumes, and I think are likely true, which is the algorithm is going to pay very close attention to your conversion rate. It's going to pay very close attention to your click-through rate. It's going to pay, I think, and this is something we've had conversations about, and I don't think enough people talk about, is that Amazon at the end of the day is trying to make as much money for the X number of customers that come onto the platform each day as they can. And that means advertising costs, referral fees, FBA fees, DSP, whatever, like all costs for like how can we make the most money on the most number of sales per day per, X number of customers. So that can be what's your price point, because they're going to make a higher referral fee, if they've got a higher FBA fee on that product, but at the end of the day, conversion rate and CTR seem to be those two kind of North Star things that the algorithm would pay close attention to. What are those things that your data is showing should almost always be in that, say, top 10 of things that you're paying attention to?
Yeah, and let me certainly. So to kind of clarify too, is that the A9 algorithm is primarily focused on the organic search results. The ad auction algorithm focuses more on the advertising. The A9 would definitely certainly go off of conversion rate. It's definitely going to look at content relevance. Content relevance. Probably the number one thing that we see across most niches is title relevance stands out, right? It's probably the leading factor. Second to that would be the bullet points, the features, right? There's 25 other factors that get involved, and all of those should be worked on, right? But those are the top two that seem to come up most consistently across all the different case studies. We've worked with probably 80 niches and probably across about 40 brands total. We currently are working on case studies with in order to grow their organic ranking and ultimately their sales, a lot more profitable than just ads. But yeah, from an A9 organic rank standpoint, listing alignment definitely, as far as relevance with the title and the bullet points, definitely is more consistent, right? It's not 100%, but it's definitely more consistent. Those two, I would say, contribute probably 25 to 30% of the weight of the algorithm for A9. Now, the ad auction will look at fields like the classic description field for relevance, right? Which A9 does not. And it will also be more focused in on click-through rate. And so if you're advertising, click-through rate is important. Your classic product description, even the classic product description that's often hidden by your A+, don't ignore that. That is directly relevant to whether or not your ads are going to get shown, whether or not it finds relevance. Now, the ad auction also is going to look at things like bullet points and title. But it also, funny enough, is it does look at classic product description, where A9 does not seem to. So that is kind of a differentiating factor there. But
I'd like to double click on that, because I think there are still, I would say, a large number of sellers, including myself, to be quite frank, who still are under the impression that the classic description field is paid attention to by the A9 algorithm. And so, making the assumption that, putting some key phrases in there would be of use in terms of ranking for the A9, your suggestion would be that's not accurate.
Not based off of my observations. I'm always willing to be proven wrong. Glad to welcome that. From a big data standpoint, is classic description does not seem to be influencing the organic search that much. It'd be a small percentage.
Okay.
So Brian, with the data that you see, it sounds almost like you're saying that categories are different based on what the levers that there are to pull. Are you seeing
Correct.
that one category has a different lever that has a higher that you should prioritize higher than other, or are they all kind of same across categories?
No, that's kind of what I was saying. Is like, for instance, title relevance is by far the one that is most consistent. We see it the most as the number one factor that influences the organic search algorithm across multiple categories. From after that, that's when it starts breaking down. We do see certainly recent unit sales velocity certainly comes into play. Bullet points, those are kind of like your top three that tend to commingle across different categories. DeepM was not originally designed to identify the differences in these features of a product listing and a product's performance. It was designed to find the holes for search term relevance. Data Dive, for instance, does this for, like, say, top 10 products or like page one products, right? We go well beyond that. We're doing the entire niche, not just like the top 10. So it's not limited. If you use like a Helium 10 or a Data Dive, for instance, great tools. They have some great features, but they're very narrow in their scope because, like you mentioned earlier, big data costs a lot of money. It really does. But we're analyzing the entire niche, so that if you have a product that is sitting down in page 5 and you're struggling to figure out, it's like, well, how can I focus in on this product trying to compete with page 1 if I can't even get it past page 5? Well, we can tell you exactly how to move it from page 5 to page 4 to page 3 to page 2 and then ultimately to page 1. It may take time in order to get to page 1 from a relevance and a sales velocity standpoint compared to other products in the catalog, but it is definitely feasible. But DeepM was designed with the intent of identifying the holes in the competition that can be exploited, where you've got competitors who are not strong from a content relevant standpoint and a sales velocity standpoint on specific search terms. Like, you know what? A lot of your competition in this particular category is really weak on this search term, yet that search term has value. Go ahead and optimize and go after aggressive advertising. If you want to add on outside sales on that term, if you can drive that, cool. But ultimately optimize for that. Get a page 1 organic ranking on that search term and then start building around that, to the point where we can actually look and see, like, okay, what are the different search terms what's the minimum number of targeted search terms that we could rank on page 1, maybe top 5 of page 1 for across, let's say 8 to 10 search terms, for instance. And those combination of those search terms, not only can you, before you spend a dime, do any optimization or any kind of changes, it can predict, yes, you can actually rank high for these. And here's exactly what your sweet spot is. You're going to be able to go at least, you're going to move from position 38 to position 10 and potentially up to position 5, but you're not going to get past position 5 because the competition is too strong above that. That's how accurate that is. But what we can do is we can then combine those and say, okay, if you actually invest into these specific 10 search terms, now you're also going to get the bestseller badge for that subcategory. So you're not just hunting and pecking and hoping that you're driving enough sales volume in order to win bestseller badge. You actually know which terms that you can focus on. And that kind of circles back around to what should people doing as far as their advertising, as far as their product listing, is focus. Get down to that Pareto, that 20% that's going to make a difference. Stop shotgunning your advertising out to everything. Get more narrow and more aggressive on the specific targets to serve a purpose to get an end result, not simply just to advertise to get advertised sales. That is a business methodology that has worked for years. It's what I've always taught, but it can be very expensive for some product niches, for some subcategories. That can become too expensive, and you've got to shift from, hey, I'm just going to continue to throw money at advertising because I want the advertised sales. I want to focus my advertising and my SEO effort into these specific targets because I want that organic ranking visibility that's going to stick, for one, but also I don't have to, pay a bunch in advertising. I might have some maintenance advertising to help prop it up, but I don't need the advertising in order to get there in the first place. So ultimately, to those who can't afford big data, we're trying to make it accessible, of course, but certainly for smaller brands, focus in on narrowing the target search terms that you're trying to rank for. That includes your advertising and your listing optimization. Narrow your focus and go after those.
So it sounds like the advantage here, again, kind of going back to like a Helium 10 will show you something like, hey, I need this much sales velocity in order to rank for a particular keyword. Whereas you're giving, once you have big data, you have more of that granular control to say, hey, here's the combination that you need, whether that be keywords in order to get to that next level, or even within the listing as far as being in your title, being in your bullets, those types of things in order to get where you want to go. By being able to move those dials a lot more as opposed to just kind of essentially open and closed, which is what we have with the
sales velocity is a great metric. It really is, because it is definitely is based off of my observation. It's probably the top three as far as weighted factors in A9 in organic search. But it's only like one of 20 to 25 factors that could cumulatively contribute. The idea of, hey, let's go after a bunch of long tail search terms that don't have that much search volume, but everybody else is weak on it, and so I can just jump in and just take over, SEO on long tail search terms. But it's the accumulation of, if I can get 50 of these long tail search terms, that's going to equal the search volume that some of my bigger competitors are having to pay through the nose in order to get. It's a similar kind of concept in that, yes, you can entirely focus on one or two factors to organically rank, and that can influence your organic ranking, but it can be very expensive to get there and to stay there. Versus if you now know what some of the other factors are and you work on some of these other factors, you become less reliant on those expensive things because you've got more situational awareness. You've got a bigger picture view that says, you know what, I'm going to work on these 5 things that I ignored or didn't emphasize much, previously. I'm going to craft my, let's say it's your bullet points you need to work. I'm going to craft my bullet points. I'm going to split test my bullet points more and more and more, and just constantly work on that, because I know that in my particular product niche, that is a top 3 factor. That's probably a good effort for anybody, regardless if you've got access to big data. Title, bullet points, and then, of course, sales velocity. But I do see too many times where new brands, they try to come out and launch, and they'll spend a huge amount of money and time thinking that they're going to rank in the top of page 1 against these 800-pound gorillas that have 50,000 reviews. Like, good luck. Yeah, you can show up for a while, as long as you're paying through the nose in order to be there. But whether you stick there, as soon as you back off on whatever that promotion is in order to game the system, you're going to fall off because you're weak in all these other factors that they have strong on that you weren't even aware of. So it's no longer, it's not back, it's not the Wild West days, where, it's like, well, just do one thing, one factor, focus on this one thing, and you'll win.
So there's no golden BB is really what we're learning out of this. I said there's no golden BB. There's no like one magic solution where I'm going to win Amazon, especially at this point.
Right. But if you find that one of these top things are just too expensive to play in, and you're thinking about like, well, I need to get out of this product line, that may not actually be the case. What it may be the case is your listings and your product performance are weak in other areas that you have the ability to improve. Things like the uprising of the negative, the 1-star review mitigation, 1-star review removal services, for instance, from a negative review mitigation standpoint. that may only contribute 6% to the weight of the organic search algorithm. But if you're the only one that focused on that, if you just correct that one thing that has this small contribution, call it a long tail factor, if you will, that has a small contribution to the overall, organic search algorithm, that could be just enough, be the tipping point that it puts you 10, 20, 30 competitors ahead just by tweaking one little thing that we might previously dismiss because, that's just a minor thing. I'm not going to focus on that. Yes, but it may be the tipping point that puts you ahead of everybody else who absolutely is just failing on that one factor. If you do a little bit better than them, then now all of a sudden you've got a 6% advantage.
Well, and I think it's also important to point out that there are certain factors that are compounding factors. So like let's take negative reviews, right? Like Amazon themselves take into account your review profile as a primary factor, like it's there. Like now the percentage that it attributes is, debatable, but it is a primary contributor, I think, to A9 ranking. But it's a secondary contributor in the sense that depending on what the rest of the category looks like for your product, addressing that will potentially move both your click-through rate and your conversion rate as compared to all of your competitors if you can get those negative reviews down, which then flywheels and spins that algorithm more because now other factors that are a part of that algorithm are now being affected by that one thing that you focused on that nobody else did.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things that we have observed, and one of them was just like yesterday we discovered. So, one of the things that what we've known for a while now is because the organic search algorithm, call it A9, because A9 places a different weight on the different contributing features and factors of a product listing and its performance on a specific subcategory, specific product niche. You can craft your product listing and its performance based off of what is heavily weighted. So, like say price, for instance, may be one of the compelling factors in a commodity product. If you're selling toilet paper, then other than maybe 1-ply, 2-ply, known brand name, price is usually, as a commodity item, price is probably going to drive that. The machine learned behavior of the consumer is they seem to keep on buying the products that are the lower price. Therefore, it's going to start weighting price as the driving factor in that specific subcategory. Now, if you go to something like Rolex watches, which I don't actually think sells on Amazon, but let's say there's a category for expensive, Rolex watches, you can be sure price is not the driving factor. Review rating and review history and that profile for reviews is going to be probably the number one factor that is going to drive conversion attention. And Amazon A9 knows that because it's been machine learned to observe that most consumers will take time reading through reviews. Therefore, it must have this huge contribution to actually making a purchase.
Can I ask you a question then? Because that brings up an idea. Well, I don't know if it's an idea, but it relates to my category. So we sell pool cleaning tools, which, to be honest, is very much a commodity category. At least it's become that, especially with the influx of so many Chinese sellers. I mean, it's been that for a long time, but it's even worse now. And price is becoming, very much a factor, which, we intentionally came into the category with the idea of setting ourselves apart as not being a commodity product. And of course, we have a specific customer avatar that is okay with that. But the problem is we are reaching a point where it seems that Amazon is not okay with that. Like, it's been very difficult for us in terms of ranking and keeping our costs down in terms of advertising, things like that. Our percentage of sales that's coming from ad costs is climbing. And what you're saying there suggests to me that it makes a lot of sense that the A9 algorithm is now taking, it's looking at price as a significant factor, as there's a lot of people in that category that really are shopping that way. And so therefore our high price point, may continue to be problematic. It may be something that's difficult to overcome with all of those other factors that we're, trying to work on.
Yeah. Yes and no. So price is one of those things that I thought was going to have a much bigger weight with A9. And in most categories, price is like 3 to 6% weight of the weight. In a commodity niche, it might be 10 or 11%, right? It's not like a top 3 kind of thing, right?
Okay.
But if you only have a 1% disadvantage across all the factors combined to most of your competitors, and all you had to do was increase any one of these factors by 2%, and you could leapfrog ahead of all of them, price may be that one thing that you manipulate and you get better at, and you're able to leapfrog. But maybe price isn't, maybe you say, like, well, I don't want to reduce my price. That kills my profitability. Let me focus in on, here's this other thing, whether or not I've got this particular badge, or I have, Prime, Prime eligible, FBA or something like that. Or in other words, there's 20 other factors. Well, if I can bump any one of these up by 2%, now I'm 1% ahead of my next 30 competitors. I've leapfrogged them. So it doesn't have to be on price. We, as humans, we observe the outside and we look at this and say, like, well, look, everybody seems to be competing on price. That must be how they're winning, because they're on price. But in order to do the analysis, kind of the deep data analysis that we're doing in a specific product niche, you would literally need a team of 30 humans every single month looking at all your competition every single week in order to accomplish what we're able to accomplish through the big data analysis. That's what technology has given us. That's what machine learning and AI has given us here. Is we haven't even incorporated anything as far as like the language models yet. That's our next, that's another phase. But at the same time, you don't have to. It's the same kind of thing of like, you know what, I want this really high competitive 2-word term, but you know what, let me go ahead and get these 10 to 20 long tail, 4 or 5-word terms. Let me win those. And from a sales volume, I'll be up, probably similar to that one guy that's got this one competitive term that it's expensive. In other words, he focused on this one, you focused on these other 10, and you solve the same problem from a ranking standpoint or sales velocity standpoint. And so it doesn't have to necessarily be, your observation may be that, hey, the price is being driven down. There may be plenty of other factors that you can tweak and leapfrog so that they're playing the price game, but you're not.
Right.
So I think this,
thank you.
Maybe it dovetails well into one of the topics that I've got on here that I think a lot of brands would be interested in, which is if you've been around for a while as a brand and you've launched products, you've definitely run into a situation where a launch did not go the way that you wanted it to. And you end up with a product that basically either struggles or quite frankly fails. So if you have one of those products, one of the things that you have in your notes is reviving dead products. So what insights can you give us for the brands that are listening and like, hey, I launched this product and I feel like it's a dead product. What can I do in order to revive that product?
Yeah, as far as from a prediction standpoint, there's always going to be a margin of error when it comes to any kind of data analysis and prediction. So it's not like we've got, in other words, there's always going to be a margin of error. When we have enough data for an established product that sells well already, and we're looking how to exploit that and go even further and lift the sales and the organic rank even higher, our accuracy might be 85, 90% correct, right? As far as, hey, we predict this 85, 90% of the time, we're going to be able to hit that mark. When we don't have that, in situations where the product hasn't been selling, it doesn't have much in the way of sales velocity and sessions and these kind of things, it's kind of been a dead product or a failed to launch product. Similar is if you've never launched the product in the first place and you're just looking at a product niche and saying, like, I wonder if I should get in there. I wonder if that niche has any weaknesses for me to go after that I can exploit and I can win in those areas. In other words, I need to be able to pick my battle rather than going head to head with these 800-pound gorillas that are established. I'm going to essentially steal a market share from 50 different competitors in this space because they're all weak in different places. And I'm going to exploit every single weakness that's in that niche. And that's where I'm going to win. I don't need to have a top 5 organic ranking on these highly competitive terms. I can look for everything that is a hole, a chink in the armor, a hole, in the competition, and I can exploit that through SEO, through advertising, and I can properly launch. I could relaunch, or I could grow my existing sales. So yes, all 3 of those are possible if you have enough information about what your product niche and your competitive set are doing or not doing correctly. And the second part of this is being aware of how that changes from week to week. Because you may have competitors that go out there, you launch a product, you relaunch a dead product, you're starting to grow visibility and sales, you're starting to get seen. Now all of a sudden, hey, how come something slowed down? How come my sales rank dropped from 15,000 down to 30,000? It's probably because of what your competition did, not necessarily because of what you did. And there, you've reached a tipping point where you always had the competitive advantage this whole time, and enough of your competitors logged in and started using ChatGPT in order to improve their conversion rate of their bullet points. And now all of a sudden they've got a 0.5% advantage on you, and that creates a massive drop because what I like to call competitive shelves is they tend to bunch together, whether it's bids on advertising or it is their strength in any one of these factors that go into A9 search ranking. Is it may only be a 1% difference between you being below them or you being above them. But there might be 20 competitors in between that is very fragile. So that's kind of where we run into. It's like, okay, do I have enough gap between me and my competitors? The thing that we figured out yesterday is we had the ability to see also is, okay, I am super strong in this one factor. In fact, I am better. I am 30% better than everybody else. I don't need to be that strong. I can dilute that a little bit, or I can be more experimental in other factors, adjust my price up, whatever, because I've got some room to play before I fall off that cliff and jump down, fall down to a lower level. But if I'm just slightly above, that says like, okay, you need to work on building up your strength, your foundation, because you don't have enough room to play. So whether that is knowing if you're launching a product, if you haven't launched into a niche and you want to know about that niche, the ability is there to go in and to hyper-analyze an entire product niche. If you have a product that doesn't have any sales or very weak sales history, very weak session history, where you're trying to revive that product and you're looking like, okay, how do I position this product among my competitive set to exploit their weaknesses so that it fills in gaps? I don't want to change my hero product or my sidekick product, but I do want to have this little minion over here, this minion product over here. I want them to exploit these individual gaps and start paying for itself and start selling through the inventory, because I definitely don't want to get that bill from FBA because I've had inventory in there too long. Mm-hmm. I've seen some really high ones in that.
That's a very interesting concept. I don't know if either you, John, or Matt have heard that before. I haven't, in terms of that idea of these kind of search shelves, where you might have a bunch up of competitors that you could easily leapfrog, over 10 or 20 competitors with one minor change. That's actually something I've never heard. It's an interesting concept to me, but it makes sense that could be true. So I think that's it. It's a different way to look at things, recognizing that there could be a shelf, so where maybe you're sitting at, position 25, and you think, you're looking at that and going, man, the difference between 25 and 5, like that's a massive shift. When in reality, maybe it's not a massive shift. Maybe it's a very minor shift that moves you, that far.
Well, I think
There's
the
a
reason
number
why
of-
we haven't heard of that is because there hasn't been the technology to be able to sift through all of the data that would have to get you to that point until now.
Yeah. Some of these have been theories for mine for years. And I've built things like Chrome extensions in order to try to test them for myself and experiment and everything. But even then, it was very, too small of a sample to be statistically significant. And so when you start getting into, massive data crawling and analysis and looking for patterns and looking at things the same data 100 different ways, you start finding things that are just not feasible for humans. Like I said, you would literally need a team of 30 people in order to do the same kind of analysis. There's nobody who's going to hire 30 people just to sit there and crank through a single product niche analysis, unless you're some major brand, and then probably not even then. So that's kind of where technology and speed and the ability to crunch massive data, the computing power is now available in order to look at this. Yes, there's definitely a cost to it. I think probably one of the things that we have had to craft over the past year and a half is refining our scoring algorithms internally in order to interpret that data correctly so that it becomes accurate. That is definitely our proprietary edge. It's not just the data collection. It's how do you actually interpret that and how do you continue to observe that? But then to also go through and see, the nice thing about a lot of this data now is it's able to prove a lot of the theories that I got kind of not mocked, but I would say dismissed in the past, among my peers is like, yeah, I don't know if I buy that. Like, whatever. It's like, prove it. It's like, no, I can't prove it because I don't have the data behind it. And now some of these things that I'm like, it's like I knew that's the way that it worked, I can pat myself on the back quietly in some dark room while I'm working on the next generation code of something, Back when it used to matter, it would have helped, but now it's kind of like, yeah, okay, I got it.
Yeah.
Well, and I wonder if maybe an overt version of this shelf concept that's visible to everybody that I think about or comes to my mind is price. So if you look at price in a category and the products that are there in the top 50 per se, you're going to see 80% of those products, they're going to be clustered very closely together on price. And then you're going to have a few outliers.
Yeah. Now, that price actually. So if you look at things like as far as like discounts, like temporary discounts, lightning deals, coupons, these kinds of things that adjust price, you can increase your sales velocity. One of the factors, separate from simply just like how many units are you selling per day, but what have you done for me recently? What have you done for me lately? Kind of sales velocity. And in other words, there's an observation of like very recent spikes in sales velocity contribute. That's oftentimes is a top 10. I'm going to call it a top 10 factor. Is when you do these promotions. That's why you get some sellers who will go in. It's like I'm turning my coupons off. Every month. I'm turning them on. I'm cycling them every single month. I'm doing a lightning deal every other week. They've observed that their organic ranking increases as a result of spending a little bit on that kind of promotion and cycling back and forth because it actually is one of the weighted factors. But it's a hit and miss, much like a rebate giveaway or a being price sensitive, price competitive, or it's going to vary from one product niche to another. That's one of the reasons why the results are often inconsistent, is because you may be juicing something that doesn't have that much of an impact in that particular subcategory, that browse node, or your competitors are so strong that you didn't juice it enough in order to overcome that shelf.
So we've talked a lot about data, talked about the shelf. For brands that are listening out there, what is maybe one action item that you would encourage them to look at that they could take or should take right away in order to move their brand forward based on our conversation today?
They should definitely look at things as far as like where they're. First of all, for anybody that is still hanging on to the notion is that the reason that I'm advertising is in order to get those advertised sales with a focus on break even, for instance, is if your outcome from an advertising standpoint, which is probably one of the bigger expenses, if your focus is just to get the gross number of sales of your products, then you're in a weak position relative to your competition. If you are going after an outcome, whether that is organic ranking or proving that you have a much higher conversion rate on a specific search term, those should be where your focus is from an experimental standpoint. Because what I would do on the cheap, if I have a product that's getting at least 800 sessions per month and I can use Amazon experiments, I would look at my advertising and I would say, which search terms do I have the highest conversion rate on? And then I would start using Amazon experiments to A/B split test maybe my title or my bullet points. If it's not already in the title, if it's not already in the bullet points, as far as that search term that has the highest conversion rate in your ads, that's an indicator to say, like, you know what, I'm going to test this in my title and split test it in my bullet points to see, can I then move the organic rank needle further. There's other reports that are available depending on if you're Seller Central or Vendor Central or Marketing Cloud, that will allow you to see individual search terms that are based off of search only, not all your sales, but like search query performance is search only. Search only is only about 40 to 60% of your total sales. And so just be aware of what that actually is contributing. Don't just say like, hey, this is, the one report that's going to tell me the whole picture. It doesn't. But it is giving you some clues. Again, that's a secondary thing, is your search query performance as well as your advertising to see which individual search terms have the highest conversion rate and start integrating those across more of your products that maybe are in a weaker position, that maybe are not optimized from an SEO listing standpoint on those specific search terms. So it seems like a pretty basic check to do, but I can guarantee that 80% of brands are like, when it's like, oh, I didn't actually do that. I'm advertising and I'm enjoying the fact that I'm converting on the search term, but I didn't actually carry it any further into my product listing to try to get organically ranked on those search terms also.
Yeah, and I think that's the hard thing is everybody does it once, and it's just making that part of your regular battle rhythm to make sure that you're checking up on those things.
They only pick PPC, for instance, and say, well, I've got a ranking campaign where this is the only search term, that I'm going after, but it's not working. Well, because you only focused on one of 20 factors. Carry it over to other factors like your title, your bullet points.
Yeah. So Brian, for folks that are interested in learning more about what you're doing over at DeepMAI and big data, where's a good place for them to see kind of what you're working on, or maybe to connect with you?
Yeah, I mean, from a product standpoint, certainly our website, deepm.ai. The M stands for marketplace, as in the Amazon marketplace. So deepm.ai is our site. You can certainly contact us through there. I spend most of my time on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is probably where you can follow me. I think I'm up there as like Brian R. Johnson PPC still. Even though my focus has gone away from PPC, it's a factor, and it works. It works as one factor of 20, Mm-hmm. So it's a necessary evil as long as there's an outcome to the use of it. So focus that advertising to accomplish a goal, not simply just to increase sales.
Okay. Yeah, and I think that as Amazon gets more competitive, that's going to become even more and more important, along with the work that you're doing with big data. So Brian, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really appreciate it. And I think you left
Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, listeners with a lot to think about and a couple of great action items for them to work on.
Thanks, Brian.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Cheers,
Brian.
guys.
Thank you.